A few months ago, something happened to me that I still can't fully explain. I work overnight shifts at a warehouse, so my schedule is the opposite of most people. I usually sleep during the day and stay awake from around 6 in the evening until 9 or 10 in the morning. Even on my days off, I try to keep the same routine so my body doesn't get messed up. One night I finished work around 4 in the morning and drove straight home. The roads were completely empty, which is pretty normal at that time. When I turned onto my street and got close to my house, I noticed a car parked right beside my driveway. It caught my attention immediately because my neighborhood is pretty quiet, and there's usually plenty of space to park anywhere along the road. As I slowly drove past it, I got a better look. It was an older black sedan with very dark tinted windows. The lights were off and I couldn't see anything inside. I pulled into my garage and parked, but before going inside, I looked down the driveway again at the car. Something about it felt unnecessary. With how spread out the houses are on my street, anyone visiting could easily park right in front of the house they were going to. Parking directly next to my driveway didn't really make sense. At first, I tried not to think too much about it. I figured maybe one of my neighbors had people over and the other spots closer to their house were already taken. About an hour later, before going to bed, I checked outside again through the window. The car was gone. The rest of the day was completely normal. I slept until the evening, got ready for work again, and when I left my house, the street was empty. The car wasn't there anymore, so I stopped thinking about it. The next night, my shift felt longer than usual, but I was excited because I had the following night off. When I finally got off work and drove home again in the middle of the night, everything was quiet just like before. But as soon as I turned onto my street, my stomach dropped. That same black sedan was parked in the exact same place next to my driveway. I slowed down again as I passed it, trying to see through the windows, but the tint was too dark. After pulling into my garage, I decided to walk down to the end of the driveway to take a closer look. As I approached, I thought I saw something move inside the car through the tinted window. It was just a quick glimpse out of the corner of my eye, though, so I couldn't be sure. It might have just been a reflection. I stopped about 10 feet away. I didn't feel comfortable getting any closer if someone really was inside. I stood there for a moment but couldn't see anything else moving. Before going back inside, I took a quick photo of the license plate with my phone. I didn't really think I'd need it, but it felt smarter to have it just in case. Later that morning when I checked again, the car had disappeared just like the night before. The following evening, I had the night off from work. After the sun went down, I decided to take my usual walk around the neighborhood. When I left the house, the street was empty. But when I returned about an hour later, I immediately noticed something that made my chest tighten. The black sedan was back again. And once again, it was parked right next to my driveway. This time, I walked straight up to it and pressed my hand against the window to block the reflection so I could see inside. The car was completely empty. No driver, no passenger, and nothing unusual sitting on the seats. The situation was strange, but technically nothing bad had happened yet, so I went back inside. The first thing I did was grab my phone from my bedroom where it had been charging. When I picked it up, I noticed a notification from my security camera system. It said motion had been detected. For context, I had a camera on my front porch facing the door, and 3 more cameras inside the house covering the main rooms. The notification didn't say which camera detected the movement, so I opened the app and checked the recording. There was a 60-second video clip saved. For most of the clip, nothing happened. The house was completely silent and still. I actually started thinking it was just a false alert, but in the last few seconds of the video, something moved quickly across the very bottom of the frame. It happened so fast that only part of a head and shoulders appeared for a split second before disappearing. My hands instantly went numb. The footage was from the camera inside my bedroom, the same room I was standing in. Suddenly, the entire house felt painfully quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I slowly turned around and scanned the room. Whoever that was could still be somewhere in the house, maybe even watching me. Panic started rushing through my head. I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. I rushed toward the door and stepped into the hallway. The moment I did, I heard movement behind me in the bedroom, then footsteps. They were running down the hallway after me. I sprinted down the stairs, reached the front door, and ran straight outside into the woods behind my house. I didn't even turn around. At that point, I didn't care who it was. I just wanted to get away. Eventually, the only sound I could hear was my own footsteps crunching through the leaves. Once I felt far enough away, I called 911. When the police arrived, the black sedan was gone. Luckily, I still had the picture of the license plate that I took earlier. About 3 hours later, they found the car and arrested the driver. It was a man in his mid-20s who looked completely unhinged. When they searched his phone, they discovered something terrifying. He had dozens of photos of my house, including some taken through my windows at night while I was sitting in my living room. He even had notes about my schedule, when I left for work and when I came home, for the past 2 weeks. To this day, the scariest part is that nobody knows exactly how he managed to get inside my house without being seen by the cameras, which means there's no way to know if that night was the first time he had broken in. This happened about 4 years ago when I was working as an Uber driver. That particular night, there was a really bad storm moving through town. Heavy rain, strong wind, and almost nobody outside. Nights like that usually mean business is extremely slow. Most drivers log off and go home, but I usually stay out anyway. Even if I only get 1 or 2 rides, it's still extra money that I wouldn't have made otherwise. For the first hour or so, I was sitting in an empty parking lot, watching the rain slam against the windshield while scrolling through my phone and listening to music. The storm was loud enough that it almost felt like I was sitting inside a drum. Eventually, I got bored and drove to grab something to eat, then returned to the same parking lot and waited again. About another hour passed before my phone finally buzzed with a ride request. When I opened the app, I saw that the pickup location was about 25 minutes away, and the drop-off was another 20 minutes from there. Normally, rides that far away mean there aren't many drivers online, so the system sends the request to whoever is closest, even if they're still pretty far. Since I had nothing else going on that night, I accepted the ride and started driving toward the pickup location. The drive felt unusually long. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was how empty the roads were. There were stretches where I didn't see a single car for several minutes. At one point, I almost forgot I was even heading to pick someone up. The GPS kept guiding me farther and farther out of town until the buildings disappeared and the road was surrounded by trees and empty fields. After about 35 minutes, I finally reached the location on the map. It was the intersection of 2 narrow roads in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There were trees on both sides and no houses in sight, and more importantly, there was nobody there. I tapped the button on the app confirming I had arrived and waited inside my car while scanning the dark road around me. The rain was still pouring down hard, and the wind made the trees sway back and forth in the headlights. After about a minute, I looked down at my phone to message the passenger and ask where they were. That's when I saw movement in my side mirror. Someone was walking toward my car from behind. Before I even had time to react, the rear door opened and the man got inside. I honestly had no idea where he came from. I never saw him walking down the road or standing anywhere nearby. The guy was completely soaked from the rain, and there was something about his expression that immediately made me uncomfortable. His face looked tense and irritated, almost angry. "You ordered the Uber?" I asked. Instead of answering normally, he simply said my first name. That confirmed he was the right passenger, so I started driving. For the first few minutes, the ride was completely silent. But something about him felt wrong. First of all, he was sitting directly in the middle of the back seat instead of on one side. That meant every time I looked in the mirror, he was staring straight at me. And the way he was looking around made me feel uneasy, like he was studying everything inside the car. I wanted to ask why he was standing alone in the middle of nowhere during a storm, but I also didn't want to start a conversation that might turn awkward or hostile. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. "So, what brought you all the way out here tonight?" I asked casually, especially with this weather. I glanced at him through the mirror. For a moment, it looked like he was about to respond. His mouth even opened slightly, but then he just looked away and stayed silent. He completely ignored the question. That only made the situation feel worse. As the drive continued, the road led us deeper into areas that looked even more isolated. There were no houses, no lights, nothing except dark forest and rain hitting the windshield. Then suddenly he spoke. "Drop me off here." His voice was firm and almost demanding. I was confused. We were still far from the destination marked on the app. "Are you sure? Drop me off here," he repeated, cutting me off. At that moment, I decided not to question it. Something about him made me feel like it was better not to argue. I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. He reached for the door to get out, but then paused for a second. His eyes shifted toward my phone sitting on the center console. The Uber app was still open on the screen. Then he pulled out his own phone and looked at it quickly. And in that moment, I suddenly realized what he was thinking. He had probably just remembered that the Uber app contained his full name and account information. If anything happened during this ride, it would easily lead back to him. I saw the realization in his face when he glanced at my phone. Trying to ease the tension, I quickly spoke up. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll cancel the ride from my side so it won't charge you." My hope was that he'd think canceling it might somehow remove his information from the system. He stared at me with the same cold expression for a few seconds. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Within seconds, he disappeared into the fog and darkness of the storm. The moment the door shut, I drove away. Even though I didn't have any real proof that something was wrong, my instincts were screaming that the situation wasn't normal. When I got back into town, I decided to report the ride to the police just in case. A few days later, I received a phone call. Someone had gone missing that same night. The last place they were seen was near the forest road where I had picked up the man. The police asked me to explain everything that happened during the ride. I told them every detail I could remember. Unfortunately, because of the storm, any footprints or physical evidence had likely been washed away before anyone could search the area properly. They never found the missing person, and they never identified the man who got into my car that night. As far as I know, I'm the last person who ever saw him. Sometimes I still think about how easily that situation could have turned out differently. Because if he had decided not to get out of my car that night, there's a chance I might have disappeared too. What happened that day started out like any other normal weekday, but it ended up being one of the creepiest nights I've ever experienced. It was early April, and it had been raining almost nonstop for several days. My job required me to work both inside and outside, so when the weather was bad, it made the day feel twice as exhausting. That afternoon, I finished my shift around 6 and drove home through the rain. My house sits in a pretty rural area outside town, surrounded by trees and fields, so the roads out there are usually quiet. As I turned onto my driveway, which had turned into mud because of all the rain, I noticed something strange. There was another set of tire tracks in the driveway. It looked like another vehicle had recently driven all the way up to my house. At first, I assumed it must have been a mail truck or maybe a delivery driver. But when I parked and walked up to the front door, there were no packages and no mail waiting. Looking back at the tracks, it seemed like whoever had driven up had simply turned around near the house and left. I shrugged it off as someone making a wrong turn. After going inside, I changed out of my soaked work clothes and went to the kitchen to make a quick dinner. The rain was still coming down heavily outside and the wind was shaking the trees around the house. Around 7:30, I thought I heard a knock at the front door. I say thought because it was only a single knock and it was pretty faint. With the rain hitting the roof and windows, it was hard to tell if I actually heard something or imagined it. Still, I got up and walked across the house to check. When I opened the front door, the wind and rain immediately blasted me in the face, but there was nobody on the porch. I stood there for a few seconds looking around the yard, but I didn't see anyone. Eventually, I shut the door before I got completely soaked. I figured it must have just been the storm making random noises. For the next hour, I sat on the couch watching a show while scrolling through my phone. Everything felt normal again. Eventually, I got up to use the bathroom. As I stepped out of the living room, though, something caught my attention on the floor. There was a small mark of mud on the white tile. It stood out immediately because the floor was clean and bright. I knew I hadn't walked through the house with my shoes on, especially not with them being muddy from outside. What made it even stranger was where the mark was located. It was right behind the couch. Since the couch faced the TV on the opposite wall, that entire area behind me was out of view while I was sitting there. I grabbed a cloth and wiped the spot away, but the whole thing left me with an uncomfortable feeling. For a moment, the thought crossed my mind that someone else might have been inside the house, but that idea felt ridiculous, so I tried to ignore it. After using the bathroom, I went back to the couch, but I couldn't relax the same way as before. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The way the couch was positioned meant the entire downstairs area was behind me, and now I couldn't stop imagining someone standing there watching me. The longer I sat there, the worse the feeling got. Eventually, I turned off the TV and went upstairs to my bedroom. At least there I could sit against the wall and not feel like something was behind me. I had a small TV in my room, so I turned it on and tried to continue the night like normal. About 20 minutes passed before I heard something outside my bedroom door. It wasn't loud, just a dull sound like a soft thump or maybe a footstep, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I got out of bed and slowly walked to the door. Pressing my ear against it, I listened carefully. Silence. After a moment, I forced myself to open the door and look into the hallway. Nothing was there. Still, I knew I wouldn't feel comfortable unless I checked the rest of the house. The only other room upstairs was a spare bedroom that I mostly used as a small office and library. I started walking toward it, then suddenly the TV downstairs turned on. The sound of the show I had been watching earlier blasted through the house at full volume. My heart immediately started pounding. I sprinted down the hallway and ran down the stairs. The entire downstairs area was dark except for the flickering light coming from the TV. When I rushed into the living room, nobody was there. I slowly walked up to the TV and turned it off using the button on the back. Standing there in the silence, all the strange things from that night suddenly started connecting in my mind. The tire tracks, the knock at the door, the mud on the floor. My nerves were completely shot. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, then began checking every part of the house. Looking back now, I probably should have called the police right away, but in that moment it felt pointless if someone really was inside because it would take them at least 10 minutes to arrive. I searched the entire first floor and didn't find anything unusual. Eventually I walked back upstairs. By then I was starting to convince myself that everything had just been a series of weird coincidences. When I reached the hallway again, I opened the door to the spare room. At first everything looked normal, then I noticed something lying on the floor near the closet. It was the remote control for the TV downstairs. The moment I saw it, all the color drained from my face. I didn't even think twice. I ran down the stairs, rushed outside, and called the police. When officers arrived, they searched the house and quickly found signs that someone had indeed been inside. One of the downstairs windows had a broken lock. Whoever it was had probably come to the house earlier in the day while I was still at work. The tire tracks in the driveway and the knock on the door were likely them checking if anyone was home. After realizing the house was empty, they must have left, only to come back later and break in, which means they had been inside the house the entire night while I was there, most likely hiding quietly and watching me. When I went upstairs, they probably grabbed the TV remote and waited until I got close to the spare room they were hiding in. Then they turned on the TV downstairs to distract me long enough for them to sneak out. The creepiest part of all was that nothing was stolen. To this day, I still have no idea why they were in my house that night, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know.